So back in the studio, Alberto, after spending a few intense days with our Mr. Beethoven.
Yeah.
And we are going to talk primarily about the reasons why there are multiple reasons, but there is one reason in particular why actually you insisted to re-record the symphony. And now if you're listening, people will not know that the version that we have on YouTube is, as we speak, December 21, is the first recording that we did. It was the first symphony we recorded, so it's one of the first.
February 2020.
Was 2020 already? We didn't record it in 2019.
2020. It was right at the beginning of.
So that was one of the first pieces we played as a duo together. We recorded maybe before that the Schubert
we did
Fantasy.
together the Schubert Fantasy. Yeah.
So we were very happy, and I still think, and I mean, you have the same opinion that it's still a great recording.
Yeah.
We recorded the symphony again the second time.
1 year later.
1 year later.
This year.
Then we did some movements a third time, and then you called me, say we have to do it completely new. And now that's the topic of this conversation that I especially wanted your contribution, because you had specific ideas why to do this. And I think it's important to address this topic for a lot of viewers or listeners, because they might think that we did major shifts in things like that. Some things were really not okay in the previous recordings. It's actually not, but we're talking very small margins that eventually are important. So tell us, what was the reason especially for you to call to me and say, hey, when we have to record it a fourth time?
In the past year, especially my way of playing changed a lot, starting with the Chopin's recording, and that had a direct influence on what we did with the symphonies.
What do you mean by changed a lot?
Changed a lot in the sense that due to the research that you do and the practical outcome that we demonstrate on YouTube or with the recordings, it becomes crucial that we are strict with ourselves when we follow some metronomes, because that's the statement that we put ahead of any recording. This recording has this musical outcome because we follow this tempo. And so as a consequence, we, especially I, started working by myself, practicing a lot with the metronome ticking.
Okay, that's something we certainly have to talk about later. But go ahead.
Yeah. From that experience, I noticed that after a few months, my way of playing was changed in a way that what at the beginning was just playing metronomically, just to get comfortable and stable with the tempo.
So in order not to speed up or slow down a certain passage.
That became also a way of making music. It was not anymore, okay, you have to learn how to play this tempo. It became... It added one layer, which was, now you're going to make music with this stability. And the outcome, in my opinion, the musical outcome was very convincing, because you arrive to a point where basically it's a paradigm shift. Today, we are using, especially in our first recordings, we were, okay, you take this tempo, but when you have to make some timings, some musical things, you can compromise a little bit, going a little bit faster or slower, you have a little bit of flexibility. Now it's the reverse. It's everything that you do, it's actually what we often say, you change tempo, you change everything. Okay, then if this tempo is the floor of your performance, then it means that you change everything else to be in that tempo.
Yeah.
that means that that tempo must be the floor on which you build the music. So means that all the other things, ornamentation, articulation, fingerings, pedalings, of course, accentuation, must be decided in function of being able to play at that tempo. Every passage of the music doesn't mean that you don't have a certain flexibility. It's still there. But it means also that the way we prepare the recordings, we are able to play musically with the metronome ticking potentially. And that's what we do recently. When we rehearse with the metronome.
Yeah, there is a lot to talk about this here, because I think when you're not familiar with our work, you might say like, okay, two things, these guys don't know how to play in time. So they need actually a metronome to do that. By the way, guys, that's normal practice. I mean, all professionals
very, very difficult.
All professionals play with the metronome sometimes to check. Everybody speeds up and slows down. I mean, you actually are one of the most. It's stunning how you can keep a. I know your teachers even say that to you.
It's a remark that I get also in conservatory, that I have this tempo stability.
So I secretly think you are more like a robot, like artificial intelligence coming from Italy, like talking about conspiracy theories. But you are very, very, very strict with tempo, and yet you had a feeling like practicing with the metronome added some stability on top of that.
Yeah.
And then second thing is, what maybe might surprise more people, that when you play along with the metronome, you say, I learned to play in a musical way. I made an interpretation with the thing ticking.
Yeah. And it is possible, of course.
Is that essential? Doesn't that rip you from the musicality, like to give a little bit of personality in the composition?
Both it's necessary and it is also not strictly necessary. That means that, of course, we are not machines, we are humans, so our pulse can change, but it's not that it changes by going like from that tempo to 20% more, 20% slower, you know. There's a range that it's more narrow than what we think. And also, it is necessary because of the research itself, not only because it's our brand mark in a way, but it's also, and we found that continuously in the descriptions of how people played back in the days.
Very strictly in time.
Yeah. And certainly, it was a thing. I
remember a quote. I don't think I brought it on YouTube, and I should insert it still in the book, because it's just magnificent. Widor, who didn't, of course, hear Chopin play ever, but he might have just had this anecdote from some of his teachers, or maybe Liszt even, because he knew Liszt. So Widor, Jean-Marie Widor, the organist, he died, I think, in the 30s only. And he said people would be surprised to learn. Actually, he says like that, like many mademoiselles, so ladies playing music of Chopin, they would be surprised with all their rubato stuff and slowing down and things like that. They would be surprised that in Chopin's way of playing, you could take the metronome and play along with his playing. Now, there are many sources, but that's the main thing with Chopin also.
Yeah, it's not the only remark that says this on Chopin's playing. So
what I remember is when we decided to have the correction movements for the third recording. So basically, I remember we did the second one again. Second movement, surprisingly, also too many, because I had a tendency to slow down. Even people will say slow movements doesn't work in whole beat, but if you start to learn the poetry and the cantabile of that, you want even to slow down more, and you get the impression really that music was already not so slow to start with in whole beat. So that was one of the main reasons. And then we also did the last movement again, where we went in the reprise and the repeat section of the Allegro, I believe from 84 to 89, 90. Like we sped up like a little bit.
Yeah.
And when you showed me that, and I remember the moment we were listening at the speakers, and if you would only hear that part and played at 90, you would say, okay, it's okay. But if you witnessed the 84, you would say, this is completely a different
changes
piece.
Everything. Yeah.
And so we talked about it, I remember this, and it was like, okay, it's not only your brand mark, like sticking to a tempo that we claim might be read like that. And granted, I mean, it's good to say you don't say, listen, you don't have 4 or 5% margin. We don't know actually how strict Beethoven would be.
know.
We wouldn't say anyone play like 88 instead of 84. It's complete catastrophe.
But also we work with what we have. The goal is always to make a reconstruction. So we work with the facts that we have.
And so we stick to the 84 if Beethoven writes it, but it's not like we are dogmatic. By the way, we do believe that 84 is the best tempo right then. But if you go to 88, 89 in the same recording, that's a level of, I mean, we should perform like professionals, and that's actually a mistake.
Yeah.
And you hear that in many recordings, that there are some increases of tempo, and if that's a deliberate choice, that's fine. And we were caught up by the music a little bit.
Yeah.
But the piece changed it so much, and for the worse.
Yeah, it definitely changes the message.
It lost, that fourth movement lost of its grandeur.
Yeah.
It became too lively.
Grandiosity of, It's, I don't know, it's part of what we do, and it changes everything, and it doesn't mean that, like that back in the days the composer might not have had one day a tempo that was slightly faster or slightly slower. But
depending
again,
on the room, I mean, those things exist. Huh?
We work with what we have, and we say that we work with that tempo, then we have to be able to play every section of the piece with that tempo.
It's basically also what conductors do when they stand in front of an orchestra, regardless of what tempo they choose. It's in their mind. They don't need the metronome to say, okay, this change. Certainly when you have later music, I mean, it's incredible what these people need to memorize from, but the tempo needs to be the same because the orchestra would be confused. What I recall, like practicing now, and okay, we practice with the metronome ticking, and it doesn't bother any. By the way, we have some sources that actually confirm that practicing along with the metronome doesn't mean that you're not musical. You have to work within the tempo, and I would say it works, in my opinion, better for the symphonies than for the sonatas.
Definitely.
Where in the sonatas, you have some sonatas that could have this symphonic character.
Yeah.
But you have sonatas where you have a little bit more, I wouldn't say freedom especially, but where a quarter note rest could be like a little bit longer.
But the thing is that you arrive to that point when your sense of the pulse is well developed in the most stable way. At that point, you have a very solid foundation where you can actually do the other things because you know how to go back to that tempo, which is essential. That is actually the most difficult thing to do. While you're playing, you always know in what range you are. And sometimes you might take time, you can go a little bit faster and can go a little bit slower, but at the end you should be able to go back. And that's really hard to do. And in the symphonies, I mean, if we want to not to have a pianist playing or like a keyboard players playing when we play the symphonies, then and we want to have the orchestral output, that's a little bit how you put 100 people to play together.
It's also known, and at the time that orchestras back in it's actually, I mean, I'm not a specialist here, but when you read sources, it might have been people like Liszt who introduced this, the conductor who is actually the performer. Like I remember read some from passages, Mendelssohn, he stood in front of an orchestra giving time for 4 bars, and then he sat back in the audience.
Everyone.
And there was someone of the military chapel all often that just acted like a metronome. So this, what we would call like a metronomical performance, is like a practice that goes back to the 18th century, was sticking in the same time was really important.
By the way, if we go to other styles of music, it's not also those are metronomical in a way. If you go like to the rock bands or like
jazz music,
or like gypsy music, it's all based on the same on a stable pulse, and then on top of that you add a layer where you have the soloists that do things off beat, but they improvise.
The drum stays sticking.
But it stays there, and it's perfectly applies for things like the Chopin's rubato
Yeah.
or this sort of
That's a
stuff.
great entrance to inform people about what the rubato at the time was.
Yeah.
It's the Italian bel canto style where the singer goes all over the
But
place. But
what's impressive about that is because you have, I can imagine these people listening to this music, they go to used to the pulse, and then you have somebody in the orchestra or like who has a solo or like the singer that just take the part of the soloist and do all bunch of stuff. Meanwhile, the rest of the orchestra keeps doing the same things.
that builds this tension,
And
of
it's,
course.
it's at that point when you do that, it's really impressive. I mean, we saw that in the Chopin's recording, like in the last prelude, like
The D
they
minor.
have those runs while the left hand doesn't move of an inch. And it's at that point, it's an impressive thing.
It gets scary in a way,
Yeah.
it's hypnotic. Why would you say that? Like you start to be hypnotized by it. Like it's like some.
There is a moment where the heartbeat of who listens, it's directly connected to the pulse of the music, and that's where things become interesting because that's where
Yeah.
like you are actually involved emotionally in the music. It's a matter of pulse connection.
And by the way, in that we're not gonna talk about Chopin, but in that particular prelude, you play like in speeds to runs.
Like
Completely mainstream.
12 13 notes a second, and I'm really on I'm on my limit, and it's not that you can go faster than that.
Yeah. The thing is that what's interesting to me, and I have to say, I learned so much in working together with you on this project because you actually brought this idea of tempo stability.
Developed
It's in a way weird because when people would look at us from the outside, they would say like Alberto's the southern type of player and I'm more the German like of player. But actually it's the reverse.
It's the reverse.
I like to be on the edge with Michael. And listen to
And
my
I'm
old
more
recordings.
like
The stability, like
squared.
don't do anything stupid, like just respect the score. And we can talk about this, what that means. But what's interesting to me is also I see the effect of my playing on clavichord and organ. I'm doing a lot more organ, Bach. Well, we're going to make recordings, but Bach stuff. So I'm practicing a lot of organ and there the Wohltemperiertes Klavier. But the stability there works incredibly well. And I remember when I played with Miklos Pani some concerts for two clavichords. He also is a player that has an incredibly stability. And people say like he plays like a metronome, but jokingly, not saying like he is like a boring player because he's an incredible.
Yeah.
But when you analyze his playing and when you play together with someone, you're really entering each other's universe. There is a stability. There is nothing there that you would say at first shows a great stamp of personality.
Yeah.
And when we had some differences, like, for instance, when the theme returned in the sonata, Miklos would just go straight on. He said, it's so well composed. Why do you need to introduce something that's so well composed? And I sometimes thought he went a little bit too far But what he does is give accentuation. He makes everything clear. It's the same approach as we are doing now in the Beethoven. And so for me, seeing these two lines is for me a huge learning curve because what it does, it creates clarity. And in fact, my teacher Jacques Van Ootmeister played like that too.
Okay.
They sometimes said like, oh, he plays so slow and so strictly. But if you listen to what he does, the music just swings because of the accents.
It develops on that.
It gives
pulse,
also a piece of, and I'm reading through Quans now again, and it's unbelievable. He says exactly the same thing as what you just said, but you might not realize. He said, when you have a steady pulse, the listener's heartbeat responds to that. And when you don't stick to that tempo,
it throws you off.
It throws you off a little bit.
But also from the side of the musician, when you learn how to play in that way, you have the feeling that you don't need to do anything, fancy or anything special. It just works.
But that's the interesting part, and that's maybe our second part of this talk. But it is very hard.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
When you succeed, like when listening to the symphony today, we listened to the last movement, which now, we make all kinds of jokes when we play, like humiliate ourselves. I mean, yeah, because every time you play, it's an opportunity. It makes me so grateful to also this collaboration, because the fourth time the Fifth Symphony means the fourth time diving into this great work.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And every time you have the impression, oh, but now I understand.
Yeah.
And this fourth movement, which is, of course, massive, regardless of what tempo you play, it's basically just based on, I like C major really a lot.
But sometimes I go to the dominant as well.
I'm so creative. Here's a dominant chord. But I mean, sometimes I had the impression like it's really taking it's a long piece. But now it's unbelievable. And you listen to it and you hear what we are doing in terms of accentuation. I mean, keep repeating that, but that's one of the main secrets playing.
It's actually
it's
what
not so easy,
people say when they say, I don't feel the energy anymore. But the energy doesn't come from the speed. The energy comes from the number of accents and how you decide to accentuate in a bar. That's where everything comes from.
Everything, and the subdivision. And there, for instance, the beginning of the fourth movement of the Allegro, I have the 16th notes, yaka taka 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 tam, and you have the massive chords, jump, jim, but I played 2 quarter notes on beat 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And now for the first, of course, I played them in the previous versions as well, obviously. But now I understood that giving the second one with a little bit of emphasis, what you would not expect, leading to the third one, gives you the impulse to the next one.
It's an impulse.
And so you have this feeling of grandeur, of majestic, I say that, that feeling, because of that partly.
Yeah.
And if you say, like, sticking to the tempo, these guys play with the metronome, it's so easy. We are so used to that that we might not know anymore how difficult it is.
But I always make the example with the beginning of the Waldstein. Like they say, if you play this tempo, it doesn't have any energy. Yeah, because you have to, at that point, each 8th note gets an accent. And at that point, it becomes really rhythmical. And you feel that it's fast. And rather than when you play like as fast as possible, the problem is that when you play as fast as possible, you have to give the least amount of accents to be able to play at the speed. But it's also true that at that point, there's no foundation. It's like trying to build a castle with the least amount of pillars, like you don't have pillars anymore. It's can be as huge as you want. It doesn't stay. It doesn't stand.
At first it's very exciting. But it gets very boring very soon. Because you don't have contrast anymore. It's all the same. You get like a nivellation of everything. Everything becomes the same, and that's absolutely not true.
And by the way, this when you are able to turn this, to transform this stability into rhythmical energy, because it's also that, you start to be impressed on how they build everything on the pulse, actually, like subdivisions of notes, harmonic changes. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's but it's always the same speed. And at that point it becomes really, really, really interesting. And you have the sense, that's sense of structure. Like the piece has its I would say its spine.
And that's exactly what was destroyed in the first recording, which was fine. We went up from 84 to another universe, 88, 89.
Yeah, but for example, in the last, like when we go to the triplets, we had the tendency, to, for example, to slow down from 84 to 78, which is actually not a lot, but you just, when you are so used to that, you just feel it.
Yeah.
And when you keep the same pulse, you arrive at the end of the piece. It's like you feel that you are not breathing anymore normal. You are breathing like at the tempo of that. That's what happens.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Like it's that is the function of the tactus. It's like connecting your heartbeat and your way of breathing to the music itself.
And it comes back to the origin. It builds the character of the piece.
Yeah, exactly.
You start to be able to connect the tempo, the pulse, with the character. And once you match both, it's very, very easy.
And you don't feel the need as a musician to do special fireworks or it's just the music is so well written.
It becomes like doing your job.
Yeah. It's not anymore about
It's a very
us.
it's a very humbling process.
Yeah.
Like Beethoven only needs us to give the right It's like what Jacques van Nootmessen said once to me at the end of, like I was doing all this stuff. I would think it was a piece of César Franck. He said, just play the notes.
Yeah.
I remember that. For me, it was a game changer.
Yeah.
You're trying to build, of course, you're at a young age and these massive works like in Franck is then, of course, in the Romantic era. And you try to be musical and to do stuff. He said, just play the notes. And everything comes by itself. Not because it comes by itself, but you have your history there. You have your feeling, your feel for accentuation. It's always the same thing. So
Yeah, and instead when you have a problem, instead of like deviating by doing something that you would prefer to do, just make it work. It's just
you make it work.
you make it work. Yeah.
And at the end, it's again, it seems to be easy, but it's actually not. It's the language of whole beat. And you've heard it also, as I've heard it. Like, yeah, I tried the Hammerklavier and whole beat, doesn't work. No, because
No.
you haven't developed the language.
You have to. Yeah, you have to. It takes years, especially if you without even talking about the pedalings, because that's another thing.
Yeah. Well,
So.
we are just at the beginning. We're playing now from the Czerny score, which has the great thing that all pedal markings are there.
Very clear.
And compared to the sonatas in terms of playing legato, you have here and there an instance where you say, okay, I would prefer a little bit more pedal, but okay, you didn't do that. In the sonatas, there are more spots where you said, I would die to have pedal here.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, this is not a talk about pedaling, but we are not dogmatic in not sticking to that. That's what people don't see often. If you stick to what is in the score and people say, oh, yeah, but if you feel like that, just do. No, because then you rip yourself of the opportunity to find out why it might be correct.
Yeah.
You just skip immediately to what is familiar to you.
Yeah.
And but that's one of the fun parts going back, well, in time potentially by just following the score, but it's a difficult one. We will talk about pedalings another time because there you had a huge contribution in the work that we are doing. And I mean, collaborating not only in the symphonies, but the 2 years that we're working now together is really beneficial, I think, mutually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Regardless what happens with this project, it's for me going through these symphonies is a high point of my musical existence.
Actually, we say this every time but every time we record a new symphony, now we did 8 of them. Like we hit a new spot, a new level. We set a new standard, and especially with the like 7th and especially the 3rd. There by listening, sometimes I listen to that and I think we really set a level that, okay, it's not anymore a matter of taste. It's just we try to, bring all the things together, and it has its own sense.
So this was about the 4th recording, and since it's the 5th symphony, guys, you never know. You never know. Every symphony should be recorded at least as many times as its number in the row.
5th symphony 5 times.
But I mean, there comes a moment where details become less relevant. But I think with this re-recording, you had to convince me a little bit. I mean, I said obviously immediately yes, but I wasn't really truly convinced that we would add another layer.
And we did.
Yeah. I don't see right now that there is room for another huge layer. I mean, we can do better all the time. There are some here and there, some imitations in voices that you don't hear, or I mean, it's not immediately clear, that kind of stuff, but it's not essential. It's just that those are to make the things a little bit better or a little bit more beautiful, I would say. So I think we touched upon a lot of important things that we certainly can elaborate more in the future, because this way of playing is something that I think might be maybe not new for this kind of music, but we connect it much more to the 18th century. And to close, the difficulty in Beethoven is that I truly believe that if you go to Chopin, that Chopin was the old-fashioned conservative composer in this regard, but that Beethoven at the end of his life started to change all of that with his as is described in Czerny's pianoforte school, is tempo rubato, where he still says you should barely notice that what we are doing. But yet there is a tendency to call also rubato in our modern way.
Yeah.
In those days, it was just the Italian bel canto, like a singer does, like you said, a rock band. You stay stable and you do some fancy stuff. But there was a moment where the tempo in itself became to shift a little bit, not to another tempo choice, but like fluctuation a little bit more. Yeah, and that's also Beethoven, I think, who was there.
In his last sonatas, from what I've seen, it's not that you cannot play in that way. Sometimes you have especially more of like a rhetorical pauses, I will say, in between the phrases. I'm thinking.
You realize that those are the exact same word as Schindler uses?
Oh yeah, really? Okay.
He says like some pauses in Beethoven you can double because of rhetorical reasons.
Yeah, it's you even without knowing you have that feeling.
But also this way of what Czerny describes, like laying down a sentence. Yeah. Like where you have a little bit of ritenuto, but it's a little bit.
Yeah, but it's not that you do whatever you want with
No, because then they indicate.
Yeah.
But you feel at the end of Beethoven's life that he started to go what we would say directly into Wagner's line. Eh?
Yeah.
Like where you have more fluctuations in tempo. And that makes it so hard to talk about this because people want to have a composer stick into a box. But with Beethoven, that's not possible. But the symphonies, they were really represent, maybe the ninth is a little bit different, but we have to see. I'm not so sure. He fits into with the 8 symphonies really well into an 18th century pattern of performance practice.
Yeah, but in the symphonies, you totally see when he wants some tempo change. I mean, the only timing that he indicates that I can remember right now, maybe there are others, but the one is on the first movement of the 8th symphony. Do you remember that in the minuet?
Also in the scherzo, the 50th,
And sometimes you have this like a poco ritardando.
Also in the 5th and in the minuet and the scherzo. It's not a minuet.
True as well. Yeah. So it means that they were precise enough to indicate when they wanted some sort of timing. So otherwise, you should be able to actually do what's written.
Yeah.
But it's only...
we follow the score, guys.
It's only possible with one reading of the metronome. That's
for sure. I mean, in this piece, the Allegro last movement, good luck, pianists, to play this.
Yeah, because they say, like metronome, for the first bar, and then we know that we do whatever we want after. Huh?
That's for another topic. That's for another time. We just covered why we recorded the 5th Symphony a 4th time, and I think we touched upon a lot of elements that in the future will turn out to be very important and foundational layers of our work. And I have to really thank you for bringing this to also my attention. And you're never too old to learn. And in that respect, I don't feel old. I see my numbers like it's almost 50 next year. I know I'm in a midlife crisis, but it's great when it feels refreshing when you have such a new
I told
insights.
You there are another 50 years waiting for you at least, so prepare yourself.
I hope not. I mean, having to change my way of playing for 50 years because of working with you, I mean, a few times in my life.
No. At that point, I fire myself. Don't worry.
Okay, guys, I don't know in which time period in your life or really real life, like 21, 22, 23, you will be hearing this conversation. But we are about to release the 5th Symphony digitally, Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, I should say these days, I believe.
Should we say the date?
Well, it's not relevant because I don't know when we are going to put up these videos. But by this time you're watching or listening now, that recording can be produced or is to be produced through a Kickstarter campaign. We will ask you what if you want to join us in producing this. And it's kind of experiment. To produce either vinyl or CD or both. But anyways, it will be released on digital platforms as all the recordings. And that's the start of something new. We have already plans till 25, I think, in releasing recordings. So
we have enough recordings to go up to 2024, something like that. We are covered.
Okay. We're going to the next topic. We're going to talk a little bit about the pianoforte, and we're going to talk about also in another podcast / YouTube episode about the analog recordings, because that's also a
That
pillar.
would be interesting.
Yeah, I think also for you, because you work with a tape recorder. That's for your generation.
For me, it's something that I didn't know it was still possible to record until I came
But you
here.
still remember what a tape recorder is. The boyfriend of Sophie, he makes guitars, he plays guitars. I thought, I'm going to make an impression on this guy by showing my big tape recorder. And he said, like, what's that for? And then you really start to, there is a 5 and a 0 soon. So you think, okay, wrapping up here my time with Beethoven, and then it's time for other guys. Thank you for being here, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Want to ask us something about the recording, don't hesitate to go on our website, authenticsound.org, and you find an email address, and you actually come into his garden where he will read all the emails and reply if you have questions on that.
Only if you are nice.
I don't care. Okay, thank you for watching, listening, and we see you soon again. Bye.
Bye, guys.